presentation today is really an invitation to see and understand focusing from a wider perspective than just a therapeutic tool, seeing it much more than that. And I'm going to be taking a biospiritual approach to this, and I call it bringing a spiritual context, not the spiritual context, but a spiritual context within which to understand the dynamics of the focusing flow and the companion relationship. All right. So, and again, I'm emphasizing, you notice I've got the article A with quotation marks around it. I make that distinction because I'm not saying this is the spiritual context that you must have. I'm saying it is one of perhaps many, but it is an invitation to look at it from this perspective. So I have two questions for you to ponder. And as I ask these questions, I encourage you to scribble down an answer. And we'll be talking about this a little later at the end of the presentation. So here's the first question. I'm going to presume that the majority of you, if not all, have been focusing. So my question for you is, what gives rise to your felt senses? Ask yourself, what gives rise to my felt senses? Where do they come from? And then the second question is, what brings my felt shift? In other words, I have these felt senses and I interact with them, and then I get a felt shift. What makes that felt shift happen? Grace means that it comes from the beyond. It becomes from a source of love and caring to free up the spirit to help this life move forward. From a biospiritual perspective, we take what's called a panentheistic understanding of reality. What that means is that we look at the divine, or whatever you want to call it, and this is one of the things about the divine, it makes it difficult. The divine is transcendent. It's beyond any description. The minute I go to define the divine or the more or life or love or the larger system, whatever it might be, that's not it. It's always beyond that. It's beyond that description. However, at the same time that it's transcendent, the divine is seen as an immanent presence. In other words, there's no place anywhere that the divine isn't. What that means is that we as creatures are immersed in the more or the divine or life or love or the larger system. We're immersed in it. It's like fish in the sea. We're immersed in it. And because of this, our bodies are the bridge to that immersion and interaction. Our bodies are wired for connection. Now, this is not something that's come up since 1970. This immanent experience, or I'm sorry, the experience of this presence has been around a long time. We can go back to 400 BCE and to the Cretan philosopher Epiphanes, who said, the God is the one in whom we live, move, and have our being. And if you look at the early definitions of the word consolation, it's really meant awareness of the heart. Or if you look at mystics traditions in Eastern Orthodox or Sufi or Celtic mystics, they talk about this, what we would define as a focusing interaction, as inner knowledge impregnated by love. Very powerful, very, very powerful. And it attempts to describe the undescribable. Now, traditionally, mysticism has been conceived as a spiritual quest for union with the absolute, the infinite, with God, and a perception of oneness with everything. So it's an immersion, a connection to that which is beyond us. But the problem is that we can't use our minds to reach a mystical experience, just like we can't use our minds to find love, to create love, just like we can't use our minds to create a felt sense. We have to let our bodies do that. It's important to understand that our mind's operating system is one of separation. In other words, I'm here, you're there. My mind uses that separation of, objectifying everyone as a way to navigate through things. I'd love the example of the metaphor of our minds as an old typewriter. It does its job very, very well, but it can't navigate the internet. It doesn't have the operating system. I recently heard a presenter talk about the mind is Newtonian and the body is quantum. And I think that's quite correct. We can't perceive unity with the mind. It relies on separation. Can't conceive oneness when you got a mind that divides everything. It's only through the body that we encounter that which is beyond us. So focusing becomes the doorway to that. So what I'd like to propose today is a broader understanding of mysticism. I'd like to propose mysticism as the experiencing of a creative personal interaction with that which is beyond us, yet intimately and creatively present. So what that means is that in focusing, when we interact with a felt sense, we are touching into and interacting with this energized wisdom presence within each of us. And it's a loving presence. It wants life to move forward. As a great focusing teacher once said, and I quote Lynn Preston here, it's the nature of life to want more life. In focusing, we experience the growing intimate edge where life is calling us forward. Now, historically, mysticism is thought to be the domain of saints and deep meditators, but any expression of it is always metaphorical in nature. You can't define awe. Like I can't describe for you the experience of standing on a boat in Antarctica and looking at the massive icebergs that were there. I can't do that. I can't explain the experience because my words aren't it the minute I say them. Mystical experiences are also not located in a unique place, time, object, or person. It's our interaction with an energized presence, and it's not a passive interaction because that interaction results in felt shifts. If you look at the classic Gene's statement about focusing, where he said your physically felt body is in fact part of a gigantic system of here and other places, now and other times, you and other people. In fact, the whole universe, this sense of being bodily alive in a vast system is the body as it's felt from the inside. That, my friends, is a mystical moment. Now, what makes all of this happen, or makes it possible to happen, it's the context of what in biospirituality we would call a caring presence and embedded with self-compassion. A lot of folks will talk about a focusing attitude, which means that I apply something from my mind. I always add more to that. I say, no, this caring presence is a visceral caring. It's an in the gut caring of compassion and non-judgment that enables that which is darkest and most fearful within us to transform into loving friends that contain the deepest insights into the forward movement, the spiritual growth, and the transformation of one's life. So if you think about it, the opportunity to have a balance between the cognitive and experiential aspects of one spirituality. And I define spirituality as where you ground yourself in terms of your interaction with the more. Essentially, I'm talking about a whole body spirituality. And I see focusing as a potential holy ground, or what some folks would call a thin place. But ultimately, to quote Father Ed, we're looking, when we do focusing, we're talking about mysticism for the millions. It's a global spirituality through focusing, because it is a capability that people all over the world have. Now, this interaction, this focusing interaction, to really find another ground from which to see, a solid ground from which to step, and from which to speak again in a different way, a clear, rested, and embodied voice. This is a mystical interaction. Now, years ago, my teenage daughter was killed in an automobile accident, and I was torn with grief. I don't think there's a deeper grief in one's life, except perhaps for the loss of a spouse, but in particular, the loss of a child is huge. And for more than a year, I struggled. And asking myself the question, what do I do with this grief? I'm a guy. I fix things. And I struggled with that for more than a year. And it was impacting my life, my decision-making, my relationship with my friends, my wife, my work was impacting me. And I knew that I had to do something. So one day I sat down and I actually did some focusing. And I allowed myself to go inside and hold the felt sense of all that my grief had. And as I did that, as I held that, eventually what came was a memory of my last minutes with my daughter, where I kissed her and hugged her and told her that I loved her, that she was special in my life. And as I held that image, there were two felt shifts that came. The first felt shift was an understanding that my grief was going to be forever. Because I realized at that point that it was my love for my daughter that was giving my grief all of its energy. So as long as my love for my daughter remained, I would grieve her loss. But at the same time, a more powerful felt shift came, in that I realized that for more than a year, I had been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, what do I do with this grief? I could now ask, what do I do with this love? Whereas there is no answer to the what can I do with this grief, or how can I fix it? There are a lot of answers to what do I do with this love? What can I do with this love? And there are a lot of answers to that. Now, that as a experience of grace, of interaction between myself, felt sense, evolving into a felt shift, that's an experience, a mystical moment arising out of grief. You know, people think mystics is all joy and happiness and everything else, but certainly that gave me a place to stand so that my life could move forward, so that the grief could remain, but my life could move forward. So it becomes very, very powerful. So how does focusing help spiritual development? From my point of view, it supports the habit of noticing and nurturing the body's role, this connection that it offers. It provides access to the felt senses, that lead me to interact with the wisdom within me. And as a result, it also, in addition to providing the felt shifts, also fosters a passive how I listen and active how I respond with compassion in all of my relationships. So it's not just a personal thing, it flows out to my interactions with everyone else. And so from a biospiritual perspective, the habit of felt sensing becomes a mystical practice. So as a biospiritual advocate, we ritualize our daily focusing. In the morning, midday, evening, we pause. Or at particular moments, if we become aware of a felt sense during the day, we pause. And we ask the question, what in my body wants my caring awareness right now? And we go through the biospiritual flow of noticing what's there, being with the felt sense with caring presence, and nurturing what comes. And going through the focusing process in that way. Now, it's a practice, not a perfect. We don't do this, I don't do it every day, and there are times I miss. But essentially what it is the opportunity for everyday mysticism. Father Ed's quote here, accessing the divine. It's a change in perspective, habit, and experience centers upon the presence of our God appearing not as some object of awareness, but as a graced presence unfolding from within our interacting relationships with life. Not looking at God, but discovering your being within God. Another way to look at it, I'll quote Joan Claxburn here. I see spirituality as a state of consciousness, a way of seeing the world that provides a sense of unity and consolation. It is that realm of the timeless that can spontaneously inspire us, comfort us, release us, heal us, fill us with awe, peace, and joy. It is a state of being in which we are seamlessly joined to a larger, interconnected field that is, in that moment, palpable and alive. A spiritual awareness gives meaning to our lives, validating our existence. That, my friends, is a mystical experience. One of the main points that I wanted to make is to make an invitation to think about our focusing and this whole thing of the body being part of this as a mystical interaction, as opposed to, the traditional thinking about mystics, some monk, some place in some cave. This is more alive. I'm not going to go to a cave, because frankly, I believe that if I go to a cave, I'm going to find myself. What I really try to do when I can is introduce this concept of focusing, because focusing is non-denominational, it's non-traditional, it's not, it's a capacity that we all have. And it's the one thing that can unify us. And as we encounter that which is beyond us, we try to articulate that, and that articulation over time takes the form of religions or traditions or practices, whatever it might take. That it takes that form, and of course there's many different ways to try to define this, but it's all head stuff. It's where the real unity is, and it's there. We all carry it, is in the body. And fundamentally, it's all part of believing in the abundance of life, and I think that's so powerful.